Well, while Rachel is getting her mic fixed, I want to say, first of all, we have two developments in terms of, well, not developments, but first is I appreciate everyone who's here being here because I was happy that it was scheduled for today, but then I found out it was scheduled opposite of the first round of the MLS draft. So we're happy that you guys have chosen to be here. The second thing is one of the deans of soccer writing in this country, who I've read since I was a kid 40 years ago, Paul Kennedy, who never makes a mistake, just told me he put in today's update the wrong time for this event. So for you, and he never makes mistakes, so I love PK. But the fact that you guys are all here, I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
In fairness, will probably be more fun than the draft, I think. So.
We hope.
All right. So, Steve, we all know that you're a lawyer and an executive, but as I was reading your background and your bio, you've done so much in the game of soccer, especially before the age of 30. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Sure.
And I won't go too long back, too far, but I would say, as probably many of you have read, my dad came from Germany and instilled this passion in me and couldn't find real good soccer in this country. So he used to take the train to New York just to see semi-pro games. And when I was 3 and 4, he would take me in the car to see semi-pro games around Boston, including those from Massachusetts, a team called the Chelsea Tigers that most of you won't know because you're not old enough. And so that passion was instilled in me. And I would say when I was 14, 15, the pro team in Boston called the Boston Minutemen was failing. And I wrote a letter to the then commissioner of the North American Soccer League, Phil Woosnam, to tell him why I thought it was failing. And he flew in an executive to meet with me. And that was sort of my first real touch point in pro soccer.
At 15?
At 15.
At 15.
Yeah, at 15. Yeah, well, at 15. At 16, I started writing for Soccer America, not in a big way, but started covering high school soccer around Massachusetts, and then the New England T-Men who came to Boston. At 17, I went away to Cornell to play college soccer, and I had a part-time job with the New England T-Men that was important to me, and I actually transferred colleges back home to Brandeis. Head coach Gabe Margolis right here, of the Final Four Brandeis judges. I want to shout him out. And transferred to Brandeis to finish college. And after college, had a lot of injuries, frustrating playing career. I deferred or delayed law school to chase a dream, both a secret pro playing dream and to help make a team successful as an executive. And I joined the Baltimore Blast from 1982 to 1984 there. And then I finally did, after helping sell a business, go to law school, and kind of thought that was it. But at age 29, I was tasked with turning around the Boston World Cup bid effort in 1990. At that time, obviously Boston, not as a city, my beloved city, it's a great city, but it was ranked 29th and last out of 29 cities in the United States bidding to become a host site for the 1994 World Cup. And that was tough because it looked like 12 cities were going to be picked. In the end, only 9 cities, as you all know, were picked to be World Cup 94 sites. And so, along with a lot of good people, I worked for 3 years, nearly full-time, and we were ultimately successful. Obviously, Boston, fortunately, being chosen as a World Cup site. And since then, in one way or the other, in youth or in pro or the Premier League or on management and player side, I've stayed continuously involved in the game. And I'll relieve you, I won't go past age 30, okay?
So you've been involved at the game in a fairly high level for a while now, but sort of further along in your life, I've heard you talk a lot about coaching your sons. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and how that's been for you, sort of, playing such a high-level role in soccer and then, sort of transitioning and being a soccer parent?
Sure. I mean, that's obviously a common bond so many of us share. I would say the 10 years that I coached my 2 sons, I have 2 sons, clearly it was the greatest thing I did for so many reasons during those 10 years. Helping to develop my sons and other boys from our town, many of whom are now college soccer players. The reward you get from that is just incredible, and obviously bonding with your kids that way is incredible. The other part of it, I would say, is it gave me a lot of insight into the youth game. And I see a lot of the challenges and the problems in the youth game and in club soccer and in terms of the relation with the federation. And I will say it's part of the motivation for why I decided to run and challenge the incumbent back last May.
That's great. So along with some of those issues in the youth game, can you sort of walk us through your decision to run? Like you said, you were the first one in this race, so I think we all kind of want to know, why did you decide to run?
Sure. So actually, people have been asking me to do this for a couple of years now, and it wasn't the right timing. I had been at a law firm, actually left 20 years ago to run companies and be in-house, and I just returned to a law firm about 2.5 years ago, and it's certainly, any transition in your professional life, it's probably not smart to take anything else big on because it's not clear that transition is going to work. So it wasn't the right time, and people had been urging me to do it, and I hopefully graciously said no. And after the Klinsman debacle a year ago last year, people came back very seriously and asked me, and that was, I think, October, November of 2016. And so I started to look at it very seriously and took about 5 months. And about March of 2017, I decided presumptively that I would do it. I felt that we were going in the wrong direction, that I could bring better judgment and leadership to the top of U.S. soccer, that I could bring people in and have them be more inclusive to address some of these issues. And there was another reason why. I just felt from the standpoint of democracy, this is a huge organization. It's a nonprofit organization. There are, this would have been the 4th term where the incumbent had no challenger. That would be 16 years. And that, we're all Americans, and that's not really how the American system works. The marketplace of ideas works in a way that there is challenge and healthy debate and all that sort of thing, and it just looked like it was going in the wrong direction that way. So I thought that was a really important principle to vindicate.
Yeah, absolutely. So since you began your campaign, you've made it a point to speak to a lot of the different constituencies. What is one of the concerns that continues to be addressed in these conversations?
So it's really interesting about the concern. So when I announced presumptively my intention to run in May, I said I'd go on a listening tour. And I did that right away, whether by phone or I think the first formal stop was in Frisco, Texas, at the USYS meeting. And I met so many people, Terry and Dan and others on the youth side, and learned a lot there. And everyone has different responsibilities. You all do so much in the game. And so there are different missions, different responsibilities, even different interests. But the one thing that has been common is lack of respect coming from U.S. soccer, lack of inclusion, lack of listening to your ideas. You're in the trenches, and I say that with the utmost respect because I feel like I'm in the trenches in areas of my own expertise, and not having a voice. And I will tell you that in the days after the May article that Steve Goff did, it was not only Youth and Adult and Athletes Council, it was actually pro executives and CEOs and MLS and other as well. So even there was that common issue at that point. So that has been thematic, that top-down edicts come, and they come sometimes when you least expect it because you weren't told there was a problem, and they don't involve your knowledge from the field. And the respect thing is obviously a very important thing, given the way I was raised, but I also think pragmatically, you can't make good decisions unless you get really good information from the people that know stuff. So that's been the common theme, and that's certainly something we want to address.
And have you gotten some positive feedback on your listening ability? Because I know when we worked together, I felt very heard and very seen by you in the discussions that we had. Is that something that people have continued to sort of voice to you, that you hear them and that they feel comfortable with you?
Well, I hope so. I think people are polite, right, Rach? I mean, they're not going to tell you.
I don't know, they might.
No, I think so. I think so. I mean, that is my management style, right? It is to be inclusive and to bring people in and to listen to them. Because, one thing I will say, I started when I was a kid in the 70s, and what I am really gratified by, the ideas I've gotten from people, there are so many more competent people in this game, throughout this game, and it's been really something that's been special. And so it just underscores the fact that decisions need to be made with the input people in the trenches. And that's my style anyway. It's not an autocratic style. Like, I can tell you where I feel I'm an expert, I would change this, this, and this about this, this, and this program. For instance, the Development Academy. But I'm never going to just do that, right? Because to me, I'm going to voice my concern in a committee. I'm going to try to be as persuasive as I can, and I hope it prevails. That's the decision-making process. It's going to be iterative, and it's going to involve all the people that are so important to those decisions. So, it's arrogant not to involve people, right? It's not right. It's also stupid, because you don't have the information that you need. It's not pragmatic.
Right, and I'm sure that's refreshing to a lot of us in the game. I've been involved in the game at a high level, and that to me is really important. We know that you could talk about all this for hours, but I'd love to know some of the issues in each of the constituencies that you would prioritize. So can we first start with what you would prioritize with the Athletes Council?
Sure. So I met with the Athletes Council when there was actually only one other candidate in Orlando before the Panama game. And we had a great meeting. And I learned a lot from them because, you think of the Athletes Council, 10 national team players, women and men's side, and the initial presumption is the national team players that we know, who most of us know. But the reality is it's all national teams. It's Paralympic, it's beach, it's futsal. And I think I want to start, and others as well, and I want to start there. And I think that one of the laments that I learned is lack of respect and lack of being listened to. And one thing I can say is, I had a lot of injuries. My stats were 4 and 13, and those weren't goals and assists. Those were 4 broken legs and 13 orthopedic operations. And so, but irrespective, I didn't have the talent. I never would have come close to the national team. So all of us obviously are respectful of national team players. And what I heard from some of the Athletes Council is they didn't feel respected by U.S. Soccer. Anybody who puts on this jersey, doesn't matter what team it is playing at the highest level and representing the country. So we're going to make sure that all those players are respected. And what does that mean? It sounds respect. Well, I think, obviously commensurate with what they need and that sort of thing. I think players in futsal and the beach soccer, they shouldn't worry about whether they're going to have expenses paid when they're going to tournaments and that sort of thing. They shouldn't worry that they have to supplement themselves with 5 jobs sometimes in order to, be part of the national team. So I think they need to get more care. Obviously, with respect to the women's national team, it was very much a hot issue at that point, and if you can believe it, in that closed-door room, I went in there, and the biggest topic of conversation was artificial turf, right? And it was about the common ground we had, because I never liked playing on it, and my older son, who played in the Development Academy, played 31 out of 32 games his U15 year, and at the end of that year, he had an L5-S1 bulging disc and almost had to undergo major surgery, and he had no congenital defect, and in my opinion, it was all about artificial turf. So I'm not a big fan. And at that point, there had just been a New York Times article that week about the fact that in the new CBA the women have signed, they seem to be happy with the economic terms, but there is either indefinite language or there's a loophole. And there was aspirational language which said that the U.S. Soccer would try not to have women play on artificial turf, or they'd limit it as much as possible. But already, since the spring to October, they had played, I think, 4 times. So that is a huge issue. Working conditions have to be made equal for the women immediately. And my pledge is that I don't go for sound bites and say I'm going to rip up the contract, because I haven't seen the contract. But what I can tell you is that there's clearly indefinite language and language that has a loophole that's not fair. So I can tell you that part of the contract will be amended, and the women will not play any more on artificial turf than the men. And I hope that is 0, by the way. So.
Player and a lawyer, everyone.
Sure.
And as a woman, I really respect that. Can you talk a little bit about the Youth Council and what you'd like to prioritize there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's just so much going on.
Briefly.
Yeah, so much going on in the Youth Council. Again, it goes back to respect. Have the state associations been listened to? I think by and large the answer is no. So that's number one. They're going to get respect. They're going to be part of the iterative process. The way the whole DA thing developed 10 plus years ago, it wouldn't happen that way under my regime. There is a huge issue, a pathway issue in this country, and we want to, in my opinion, the DA should be substantially revised, But, and I said, I don't even know if it would be called the DA afterward, the DA. And one state association president said to me, call it the DA. And I don't know what we'll call it, but there has to be a lot of change there. But what I do know is that the ODP has to get some credence back. Because I'm from a DA state, right? And many of you are from DA states, but I've heard from presidents of states that don't have the Development Academy. And what I've learned is kids have changed their horizon, their dreams, because there's no DA and because ODP has been marginalized. So when I hear that a kid from Wisconsin, how many great athletes have come out of Wisconsin? Many, many, right? So when I hear that a kid says, well, I'm not going to try to be a pro, I'll never be a pro, or I won't get to a major college because the scouts don't come. Well, that's just flat out wrong. How can an American kid, be penalized depending on where they're born? So we have to bring, there's so much fractiousness in this sport at the youth level. We have to bring people together so they're working for the kids. The other part is, of course, what we know is that U.S. Soccer has been looking at the top line registration numbers, 4 million for youth kids, and not looking underneath that top line. And what you have is big disputes and fights for players, leagues, and clubs amongst the sanctioning organizations, and it causes chaos. It causes frustration with parents. I advise them all the time. They don't understand what NEP, NPL, ECNL, DA is, this league, that league. Why do we have 2 cards? Why are there 2 state cups in Massachusetts? Why? Well,
I'm even confused on that, and I live that every day,
right.
And I still don't understand.
Right, and it contributes, Rach, to the 75% attrition rate at U13. So that is part of my platform, but it's also, I'm on record in many debate or candidates forums as saying that's the first thing we're going to tackle. We're going to have a committee that is going to solve this infighting between sanctioning organizations. It's going to be a real committee, not the committees that we've heard about from the past. Will it be the first thing solved? Not sure. It will be the first thing tackled.
That's great. And what about the Adult Council?
So the Adult Council, every constituency matters equally, in my opinion, because this game is organic, holistic. If any part of this sport in America is hurting, then the rest of it is hurting. And there are a lot of challenges for adult soccer in this country. But when you look at it, in most cases, the competitive careers of players end at 18, high school. If you're lucky enough to play in college, it's 22. If you're lucky enough to be a pro, maybe it's 24. If you're really a great pro, it might be 32 or 34. But you still have 2/3 of your life ahead of you. And what the Adult Council does, what U.S. adult soccer does, is it allows cradle-to-grave involvement in soccer. And we know, Andy Henderson knows, right? The New England Over the Hill League, which has 7 divisions, allows you to play, let me just say, adult soccer lets you play from 19 to 70. The New England Over the Hill League lets you play from 30 to 75, right? So we want everyone involved in the game forever, for their whole lives. And adult soccer needs much more help and attention. And I think there are ways to do that. And of course, same issue, respect, listening to them in fashioning ideas. The SRA issue, the referee assignment issue, which came out, is just another example of waking up one day and finding out that U.S. Soccer wants to centralize the SRA program. Well, why? Because there was a problem. Well, why didn't you tell us about the problem? And then Rick Olivas of Cal North pushed and pushed, and they said, well, there were problems with 3 of 55 state associations. So do you throw the baby out of the bathwater because of that? No, you don't. And again, this is going to be something that is going to be iterative, and the state associations are going to determine their own futures, or contribute to determining their own futures.
And so then for the last of the 4 constituencies, what are your thoughts, and how would you prioritize the issues of the Pro Council?
Wow, there's a lot going on in the pros right now, and I don't just mean in the other room. We have one pro league suing U.S. Soccer, so it's chaotic. But here's what I'd say. A soccer country can't be great, a nation can't be great if it doesn't have a robust pro league and scheme. And I think I've shown my whole life my allegiance to helping pro soccer make it in this country. Again, a kid, Terry Fisher, was the coach of the LA Aztecs, back in the day, Johan Cruyff when he played here. And That's a league, I think we all think, that could have made it and stayed strong in this country, but for some mistakes that were made. Major Inter Soccer League, well, I think awarding the World Cup, that pretty much said, let's get serious and get back to outdoor soccer. But MLS, we want to support, right? We want we want the best league we can have here. We want the players to be able to develop here. And all the other leagues too. I was at a candidates forum in Lake Tahoe, and, on the TV, there was the Reno USL team, which is a partner team to San Jose Earthquakes. And, they were a big part of the sports segment and the lead to the news. And I said to myself, smaller towns, this really is starting to mimic what goes on in the rest of the world. And we want to support all the leagues in this country. Pro soccer has to be healthy for the whole sport to be healthy.
Absolutely, and I think, as a former pro, Steve was actually my representative when I played in the NWSL, and he and I have had many conversations, and he's patiently listened to me voice both my love and frustrations with the game at the Starbucks in Waubun. And I just want to know, how will you address the gender equity and other equality issues that are being presented right now?
Sure. Well, first of all, that, again, with the women's national team in that issue, I pledge pay parity for the women under my administration. I say pay parity because, as most of you know, right now there's a different dynamic in terms of the women are employees of U.S. Soccer and the men are not. So it's not apples to apples, but pay parity for sure. In the NWSL, there are a lot of challenges, and I'm involved in the NWSL. I'm outside counsel on many matters to the Boston Breakers. Obviously, conflict waiver was signed, and
Yes.
I represented Rachel while she was there, and so the club allowed that. And so there are a lot of issues with that league. And a league can't be fully professional in my mind unless players are able to live off their salaries. I look at three criteria. Is it really a league with a national footprint? Is it playing at a high quality relative? And are players able to live off it? And in the NWSL right now, not enough players are able to live off it. Now, I'm not going to, again, soundbite and say, okay, now we're going to make sure everyone is able to do that, because I believe soccer in this country is all about the Santayana rule. Those who forget the past, condemned to repeat it. And it happens totally often. And we just had 2 leagues that didn't make it prior to this league. So the concept of being fiscally prudent makes sense. The concern is maybe it's too much in that direction, because, again, I've learned through helping out Rachel and that kind of circumstance that we really need to do better. So U.S. Soccer should get credit for supporting the league, but I think it can do better. How? Money from operations, maybe part of the surplus, and they have the A&E deal, and there are a small number of millions that are in the bank from the A&E deal. And so, in fact, that could be used to help subsidize that league more. I think players need to be paid better. We have a concern right now. This needs to be the #1 league in the world where every woman in the world wants to play. And right now we've got sort of not the inverse, at least in a microcosmic way, where players are leaving at least for parts of the season, going to France and other places. We need to reverse that.
I think that's great to hear you say that that there are millions that can be put back into this from the A&E deal, because, as you remember, when I was playing, I worked 2 and 3 jobs, and it's tough to have that league be the best in the world if we're exhausted from working other jobs. So I know a lot of people are really grateful to hear you say that. You and I have also spoken a lot about transparency in the game. Why is transparency so important to you?
I mean, that's a word that's been thrown around a lot by a lot of people. I want to say for the record that, and when people take your words, you should be flattered, because hopefully they believe that you're saying the right thing. But I started talking about 30,000 feet edicts and transparency way back in May. I respect everybody who's running against me, but they all came in after the October debacle. And transparency is a very important thing. Why? Obviously, this is a nonprofit organization. Everything has to be open and above board. Transparency is important because I hear it from the constituents, right, who talk to me about the mystery and decisions coming down without their involvement. So that's important. And why else is it important? It's important from an ethical standpoint. This sport is a sport we all love. That's why we're here, right? It's in our souls. you know, in one of my orthopedic operations, the doctor opened up my hip and said, you know, you never should have given up baseball. You were built much more like a baseball player than a soccer player. And because of restrictions in my hip and hips. And so, you know, I don't regret it at all, because this sport that we love is the international language, right? What I love is going to play a pickup, I used to love, I'm not playing anymore, but play a pickup game in Cambridge at Harvard or something like that. Just play a pickup game. And people that you cannot speak to, and they can't speak to you because they don't speak the language. And it could be 3 or 4 languages in one pickup game. And yet you're all speaking the same language when you play. There's nothing else like that. That's why we love it. It's incredible. Yet, what do we hate about it? It's by far the most corrupt game in the world, right? It's horrible. I mean, it's what there's a radio host once called stench in the nostrils. It's just horrible. And so that is important, transparency. I have no FIFA ties. There's no conflict, either business-wise or otherwise. This organization, I represent nonprofits and for-profits that do transactions with nonprofits. This organization will be run under my administration in a transparent, legally properly, open way. And we will set a standard internationally about ethics in the soccer world.
So, going off of that, can you explain to us then why you're the best candidate for this position?
Well, I'm surprised you asked that, Rachel.
We love it up there for you.
So here's what I'd say about that. When I went to my partners last March and said I was going to do this, or could I do this, and they approved it, I told them it's going to be me against this guy, Sunil Gulati, and right, most of them were in soccer people, so they didn't know.
Plot twist.
What's that? Plot twist. But I told them, here's what you can expect. I'll be able to manage my practice during the campaign. It will get more intense. And then, lo and behold, October 10th happened, and there's no incumbent running. And since October 10th or 11th, we have 7 other people that have jumped in. And it's dizzying. You know, it's dizzying for me. I know it's dizzying for you. In my town, there was just a mayoral race. It came down to 3 people. And I was annoyed, right, with how many phone calls, collateral materials, and emails I got. So I can only imagine for you delegates how many you're getting from 8 people, right? So it's exhausting, and it's exhausting from this end, too. And I will say, without whining, I talked to my campaign team, and you know, I said, wow, it's up to 4. This person just jumped in. It's 5, it's 6, it's now 7. And then in late December, it was 8. Well, actually, could have been 9, but one didn't become eligible. So what they said to me, and they're great, they said, put your head down and execute your plan. Yes, it's messy. It really is messy. It's kind of a circus. But look at the profiles. Nobody is your profile, which is to say that this is a 150-employee, $100 million organization, right? And so it needs someone that has organizational leadership and business experience, for sure. But it's not any organization. It's not any $100 million, 150-employee business. It is the soccer organization in this country, or one of the major soccer organizations in this country. So it needs someone who has the soccer expertise. And their point, which I candidly subscribe to too, is it needs both of those profiles. And what we have in the other candidates is we have bona fide soccer people, for sure, national team players. But respectfully, I don't think any of them have the business and organizational leadership experience. And then we have people with impressive business backgrounds, for sure. But none of them have the deep and continuous and broad business and organizational leadership experience that I say humbly that I have. So if the voting delegates agree that that's what this needs, obviously there are some that don't, right? You know, they think it's enough to only have one of those. But our conversations are very encouraging, and I think that from a merit standpoint, most do see that you need both of those qualities. And again, I say humbly, I'm the only one that has both, and I think that is what, amongst this crazy group crazy number of people, I should say, not crazy people, but crazy number of people of 8, I think that is, again, distinguishing.
You talked a little bit about, is this on? No. Uh-oh, okay, well, allow me to project. So you talked a little bit about your decision. Ozzy. Are we good? I don't know. It's okay. But last spring, it's on. It's on and off and all over the place, which is kind of like me, but that's fine. So you talked about your intention to run last spring, and I think some people were shocked because no one had ever challenged the incumbent. You talked a little bit about the courage that took and the people who sort of urged you to approach and take this on. But how do you feel about your campaign and where you are now?
Sure. I mean, and Rachel, you're right. I mean, a lot of people were shocked, and hopefully it wasn't because it was me. I think it was because it was anyone, right? And that was kind of the mindset that, never been challenged, never will be challenged. That's just the way it is. I felt it was time for change, and I think that I'm really happy, honestly, that we're going to get, that there is a change coming. My hope and my concern is that we get the right change, because there's a chance we could get the wrong change, and there's a chance that essentially we'd get no change. So that part of it, I'm really pleased about. I obviously want to make sure it's the right change to move soccer forward. In terms of how it's going, we are very encouraged by our conversations and how this is going. So some of the candidates, multiple candidates are, as you know, are independently financed. We don't have that, luxury. We can't match the money that others have on a plane constantly. But one thing I can say is, by far, we have the best campaign team. Why? Jim Leahy, college teammate, works for Scott Ferson. After the announcement came out, Jim talked to Scott. Scott said he wanted to meet me. Scott is Ted Kennedy's former chief strategist and press secretary, and said, I don't like soccer, but he met me, and after the meeting, he said, but I like you, and I'm going to help you out. And he's volunteering. And Harry Reid's former campaign manager, who does like soccer, is volunteering, Senator Harry Reid from Nevada. And we have an amazing, amazing campaign team, and tremendous volunteers like Nathan. And I know by far this campaign team is better than anybody else's campaign team. And I meet with delegates, and I talk to delegates, and I report back, and those conversations are positive. Now, I want to say, mind you, for every candidate, some of it is self-selecting, because the people who talk to you are the people who want to talk to you, right? So you expect there is some interest, right? But that's true for everyone. But the calls are going, and the meetings are going so well, and I report back, and they do their numbers, and as of the end of last week, what they say is, I'm in the top 3 and not 3rd. Now, that's not a cute way of saying I'm second. What they think, I'm 2nd or 1st right now. Nobody can really know. I had one candidate call me and say, I'm 1st. I know I'm 1st right now. And I just said, you can't know you're 1st. I can't know I'm 1st. But we feel safely in the top 3, and the conversations are going well. Now, obviously, there's 3 weeks to go, and things can change. But it's a really good position to be in at this point. And I think in some sense it's a question of meeting people, because I don't have that luxury of all that financing, and because I also write virtually every single thing my own. The Athletes Council questions took 3.5 days, and other people are hiring staffs and outside consultants that sometimes you can't be on the phone all day long. And I still have not taken a leave of absence for my law practice. So in some ways it's a question of just reaching people, but I think in most cases, people, once they meet me, are favorably impressed, hopefully, and they like me personally. So I think it's going really well.
That's great. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answer, Steve. I'd like to open it up now to questions from the audience. So I'm going to make my way down here and hopefully make it safely down the stairs. Okay, do we have any questions? Excellent. I'll hit you first because you're right here.
Hi, Steve. My name is Mike McNeil. I'm from San Francisco.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
You wrote to me.
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah. So obviously, I have a Development Academy club, and we just put a PDL program at the top of the pyramid to try to really create a pathway for our
You
players.
do have a development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You spoke briefly about you would change the DA system, or I'm just interested to hear a bit.
Sure.
I'm with you 100%.
Right.
Right. There's frustrations for me in my position, being the director of coaching. Just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, again, Rach, how are we for time?
We got about 17 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So there's so many things to say. But when I say that I'm in the trenches, just like you're in the trenches, so I say trenches with the highest respect, and that U.S. Soccer should be coming back for feedback. My trenches on the youth side these days, obviously I did town travel and I was on the board of my town and all that kind of stuff, but I was on the board of a DA club and represented them as their lawyer, and also parent of two DA kids. And so I've lived the edicts that come down from Chicago that just smack you in the head and don't seem to make sense. In an overarching sense, what I would say is, we aren't creating players. We're sucking the joy out of players. You know, Lionel Messi went to the biggest academy in the world, and anybody who watches him sees him play, he plays with joy. We're creating players in our system that have lost their joy. My experience is, not true in every development academy, but if you have 6 kids at the end of the development academy cycle at U18 and U19, or out of 22 who are happy, that's a big number. How do I know? Well, I've experienced a lot of kids I've coached, played in the DA, and have come to me about their concerns. But here's how I know. I'll give you 2 quick anecdotes. My own son, who loves this sport and loves Arsenal, and it is in his soul, just like my dad gave it to me and I passed it down, and a talented player. He went through the Development Academy for 7 years, and near the end of that, my wife and I saw that he was losing his love for the game in a huge way. And he committed to a college. And in our club, by the way, there was an apocryphal, I think, but true, at least in terms of result, and Gabe can actually tell if I've got it right, but a kid who committed to Michigan, who came from a town where it was a real badge of dishonor not to play for your high school. And so, and this is before the current coach of Michigan, by the way. So, I forgot. But said that he wanted to play a year of high school, and he did it his senior year, and he didn't end up keeping his recruitment scholarship or money or whatever, and didn't go to Michigan. So we've always labored under that. Oh my gosh, you can never play for your high school. But we had a big, I love my club, the club we're with and I'm devoted to, but I love my son too. And I saw what was happening to him. And so I went to the school that he committed to and said, I know this is a no-no, but this is what's happening. Can he skip his last year of the DA and play high school? And to that school's credit, to the recruiting coach's credit, they said, yes, he can. And he didn't play for the Development Academy, and he played for Newton South High School in Newton, Mass. Quality, not so great comparatively, but guess where he got his joy back? Playing for high school. And now, he's playing at Brandeis for Gabe, and had a pretty good freshman year and helped lead them to the Final Four. And his arc is just like that again. He's got it all back. So that's a story I've experienced personally. The boy you saw, Connor Larkin, on that tape is not my son, but he's like another son to me. He's one of the boys we coached on a team called Newton Arsenal way back, a team where a lot of kids now playing college soccer from. He played in the Development Academy 7 years, more dramatic. By the end of it, he said, I don't want to play college soccer. I went through all this, I'm not playing college soccer. I hate it. Sucked dry. I took him out to breakfast and I said, Connor, you got to do what makes you happy. But I'm telling you, once you get distance from what upsets you, you will get joy for this game back. And he didn't play his freshman year, and by the end of his first semester, he said, I got the love back, and now he is a happy college soccer player. And these stories happen all the time. We have to create players with joy. Specifically, with respect to the DA, being in the trenches, so I was a dad for 7 years, and we're talking now 2 years ago because my son left, so we're going back 9 years where it started. My experience was every season, every 6 months, you would have a new rule and edict come down that was aimed at making the kids more professional, but instead was counterproductive and added the wrong type of pressure, sucked the joy out of the kids' game. And these kids would come to me and say, the Cornell coach is here today, the Tufts coach is here today. If I have 2 bad touches, I'm out, and because of the FIFA rule, if I get taken out in the 12th minute, I can't go back in. Oh, that only happens in the DA, by the way. I hear it's starting to encroach other places. Wrong, reversed. Well, I'm not gonna be an autocrat. In that committee, I'm gonna say, we're gonna get rid of that. I would like to get rid of that FIFA rule for substitution and make it like the rest of club. So I'm told I gotta move on, but those are certain things. We gotta make it so these kids come out with the joy. You can't be a great player if you don't love this game, if it's not fun. You can't. There are enough pressures playing.
All right, other questions?
Hi, Steve. Kenneth Newman, Chicago.
Hi, Ken.
I've been following the training fees lawsuit case very closely because I know that the youth clubs are owed a lot by the pros and they haven't been getting their due. What is your feeling? Should the MLS, NASL, and WSL,
Yeah.
USL teams be paying, even if they're paying college teams, that famous letter that went to Akron from
Right.
But anyway,
Sure.
what's your feeling about the case?
So, I have a 21-point platform that's addressed in there. Anybody doesn't have it, www.stevegans2018.com. So what I would say about it is that I am, in principle, in favor of working out the solidarity payment issue. As most, if not all of you know, this started with DeAndre Yedlin being transferred from Seattle Sounders to Tottenham Hotspur. And he had been, and I don't know the exact years, but my understanding that he was with Crossfire for many years. Is that right, guys? Washington Youth Soccer. The esteemed president and executive director. He was with Washington Youth Soccer for many, many years, overwhelming maybe 90% of his youth playing time. And then went to the Sounders, signed pro within less than a year, and then sold for $4 million. And so Washington Youth Soccer was correctly upset about that. But by the way it all occurred is Tottenham Hotspur wrote a check, because that's just the way it's done. So if the money's coming, I believe it should be shared, right? And you can use that money, you can earmark that money to ameliorate pay-to-play. You can say the club, if they get that, you should use it for scholarships. So I think in principle it should be worked out. It's another one of those, you can't snap your fingers. I believe, having met with Don Garber, at least what he told me, is they want to work this out. They're on board. Most of the constituencies are on board. There are legal issues, definitely, to be worked out. I think the parties should work it out, and I think that they should jointly try to figure out the legal issues together, and because the system is different because of the pay-to-play and all that. Now, I want to say one caveat to that. A president of a state association whom I respect a lot talked to me about this yesterday, and he said to me that he doesn't think it's right because he thinks that the U.S. shouldn't do it anyway because it's dirty money, because players are following, everyone's making money off a players developed, and he gave examples of Belgium and Africa, and we certainly know about abuses like that. And my answer to him was, well, if the money is coming anyway, why shouldn't it go back to the youth? And he said, because I don't want any of the dirty money. So it's a point not to dismiss out of hand. So my point about it is there's a lot to work out, and it should be done ethically. But in principle, I am on board.
We have another question up here.
How you doing, Steve? We keep hearing about money in this campaign. How are you funding the campaign, and what do you think the impact of money is?
Sure. So I'm an immigrant son. My dad said never owe anyone anything. So I funded this campaign by myself. Was not going to take any money from anyone. And as we know, there are at least 3 candidates that are independently funded, fully funded. And at a certain point, all these great political strategists who are volunteering, Scott Ferguson and others, said, this is the difference between you winning or not. If you don't raise a little money, we're quitting. Because we're not going to give you all this free time if you don't do this. You have to do this. So I have engaged in very limited fundraising. Very, very clear that there's no conflict, no money. I mean, nobody who's given me the little bit of individual money that's come has business before U.S. soccer. Grant Wall asked everyone, Grant Wall Sports Illustrated, everyone, who are your 3 top funders? And in my case, the 3 all have common links. Friends of mine who are soccer dads, one whose son played college soccer and is trying to continue his career at Division II outside the country. Another one I coached. In fact, it's Connor's dad, who's playing college soccer now, who played with my son. And another one is a dad of a kid who played with my son. I never coached him, and he's not playing college soccer now. The common bond is they're friends, and they have nothing to do with soccer other than being soccer dads. No business before U.S. soccer. We've been very careful about that. And one thing I will say about conflicts of interest is what's as bad as having a conflict of interest is not recognizing when you have a conflict of interest. And so I've been very clear to make sure there's no conflict of interest.
Hi, I'm Tom Mulroy. I just want to know, the day you take over, what are your 3 biggest priorities and in order? So
Okay.
you're in office,
In
you're
order.
sitting there.
Yeah.
What do you get? Boom, this is the most important. Boom, that's the next. 3 things.
Right. So, I think we want to, what I'm on board, I am on record as saying, the first thing I'm going to do is start to form this committee or task force on the youth side, right? So Hugh Goodrich of Western New York, when I went to Dallas, Frisco, he drew that line about $4 million up top, U.S. soccer not looking there, sanctioning organizations fighting, right? So I am on record as saying the first thing we will tackle is that. So we're going to form a committee, filled with state associations and other member organizations, and we're going to solve that infighting because it's just harming the game. It's contributing to the attrition rate. It's frustrating parents. It's frustrating kids. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, in a formal sense, change the direction of the relationship with the members. Give a voice back, listen, create ground rules that way. I suppose this isn't 3, I'll fold that into 2. And that is that we're going to do a review of the soccer house in Chicago. I've been an employer. I've led companies as president, chief operating officer. I'm a great employer. I think I'm a nice employer. I give benefits out to the employees. But I've heard a lot of stories here that are concerning about how some people in Chicago interact with membership. And we're going to look at that and make sure the customer service standards are correct. And if changes need to be made, they'll be made. And the third thing I would say is, I suppose the sexy thing is to focus on the national team, the next men's national team coach. That's going to happen, but what I said at the beginning was, nothing works if anything's ailing. So we're going to focus on everything we need to do because every constituency needs help, needs their concerns addressed, and we're going to immediately jump on that for all of them. Again, going back to the youth, I heard one of the things is U.S. soccer only focuses on, when I went to Dallas, only focuses on the national team and the DA. Well, that's not right or nice or ethical. State associations are what, the foundation of U.S. soccer are the state associations. And also, there was a time some state associations loaned money to U.S. soccer, right? So that's really not the right thing to do, and it's not the nonprofit thing to do. But it's dumb, too. It's not pragmatic. It's not practical. Because if you think that you're going to create great national team players at the end of the pipeline when there's dysfunction going on at U7, U9, U11, all throughout the program, then, again, back to my story about joy. So, yeah, we're going to focus on the next national team coach, but we're going to focus on all of it together because it all has to be solved.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Hi, Steve. Michael Doria with Nebraska State Soccer Association. We don't have a DA in Nebraska, so the next the next opportunity for the kids to advance in their eyes is ODP. You mentioned ODP briefly in your statement. Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe some of your plans for how we would sort of enhance that program, because it is so marginalized right now?
Right.
And then maybe how that relates to sort of escalating to the national team.
Sure. So first of all, what I learned, certainly in Dallas way back last July about the ODP is how it got marginalized and how it happened, and most state associations didn't know that U.S. Soccer thought there was a big problem, and all of a sudden this thing was just invented. And again, that's wrong from a process perspective. It's just not the right thing to do. And what I've learned recently, because honestly, it was a blind spot, I'll be honest, because I'm from a DA state. When I started speaking, fairly recently, this was fairly recently, a couple months ago, when I started speaking specifically about ODP with presidents of state associations that don't have it. I heard these, and I will not exaggerate, but from a soccer perspective, it's a tragedy. Our kids have lowered their horizons. They don't dream of being pros. They don't even dream of being recruited by major colleges because no scouts aren't at the games anymore. And that, again, is utterly ridiculous that in America, a kid will be limited by what state he or she is born in, right? So I can't tell you the panacea or the answer. I know, right? It's just like when I talk to state associations about U.S. club soccer. There are 3 different answers I commonly get, or a confluence thereof. And all of them make sense about what youth state associations think about it. Well, in terms of how to solve this, I've gotten a lot of good answers from presidents and EDs of state associations that I think are valid in the marketplace of ideas. And I'm not equipped right now to pick one. And my management style is not that way anyway, right? So again, this is not a punt. I think we're going to try to solve that in a committee of really experienced people. What Washington State thinks is the way to do it might not be the way Massachusetts thinks is the way to do it. But we're going to hash it out positively together. What I do know is it's another example of this disconnect. Why is ODP left behind? We know the DA has tremendous flaws. We know that it costs a lot of money. We know kids are excluded. We know geographically they're excluded. How can it be the only way, right, to find the best players? And yet, it's turned into sort of a fait accompli, right? Because you go to the DA showcase in Sarasota, and then the spring one in Indiana, right, or Frisco, I think it might be moving. But that's where all the colleges are. And they're not at 300 D1 colleges, and they're not everyone else. So it's turned into its own thing, and a ton of players are left behind. So I can't tell you I have the answer, but I can identify the problem, and it's wrong, and there has to be, and I know Chris DeLay, I'm going to meet with him later today, he's got some ideas about this too. Terry has ideas about this. Dan has ideas about this. So I'm not going to, again, be so know-it-all-ish. I know the problem. I know it has to be solved, and we'll do that together.
So my math isn't great. We do have time for one more, and
okay.
True to Steve's leadership style, he'd like to be all-inclusive, so I saw this hand. We'll take this last question.
Steve, back to your point on the Pro Council. Given the challenges with all the different leagues from MLS down, people have talked about promotion and relegation as either a positive or negative. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I'd normally say, oh, that had to be the last question. The
Sorry.
dreaded promotion relegation question. I actually welcome it today for a reason. So I don't think he's here. He's supposed to be here, but Michael Collins is here. How many people know Michael Collins? Okay, very few of you. That's going to underscore the end of my answer. I'm going to give my typical answer, typical because it's I think well thought out. Promotion relegation is an important thing, and it's how soccer works around the world. It's extremely exciting. We all spend the last week of the Premier League, whatever league season you like, La Liga, whatever it is, Serie A, and we watch to see not who won the championship, but who gets sent down or who stays up, right? It is how the game works. The people who are in favor of pro-rel also made an important point in the wake of the failure, October 10th, and I tend to agree with this, that players who play for survival every week develop more of a cutting edge. It's a fair point. But to stop there is irresponsible, right? You cannot consider this in the context without considering the world of American sports and how sports economics works in this country, right? It's different. Soccer is not yet tribal in this country in the same way. My first Premier League game was Charlton Athletic against Norwich. 27,000 people march into the Valley. And 2 years later, Charlton got relegated. But you know what? 25,000 people still marched into the Valley because it's tribal and it's generational, right? Even the Boston Celtics, if they went down to the G League, okay, that's imprinted on us in Boston, the Boston, or the Red Sox. They wouldn't come close to getting the fan base that they have. And so to just say it, and I've heard people say, oh, it doesn't matter if the owners pull out. It's the right thing to do. Well, it's not true. I go back, Santayana rule. I go back to 1985 to 1996 where we did not have a Pro 1 Division 1 league, and it was a wasteland for fans and players. And I wish Michael wasn't here. You don't know him, and you should know him, okay? I had a little tiny cup of coffee with the Baltimore Blast. I was the 20th guy for, you know, a short period of time. I want Michael here to make clear I don't embellish, because I got signed as a player in April of 1984, not added to the roster when we played St. Louis Steamers in the final, cut in training camp in November, or October or November. Michael was a big free agent signing from the New York Arrows and a star. And what I want to say about Michael, he's the best American I've ever had the pleasure of playing with. He was, unlike most Americans playing defender, he was a goal scorer and he was creative, right? He was a big free agent signing. He was a great player. And there was no outdoor soccer to speak of. And you haven't heard of him because there was no Division I league. And he would have been an outdoor star in this country. That's when his career was. And so he played in the indoor leagues as long as he could. And of course, when the World Cup came, or the awarding, then the indoor league started to fail. So yes, in principle, but we're not getting there tomorrow. And anybody who thinks we are, I think is wrong. And I also want to say one other thing. I'm representing a major international club that wants to put a lower division team in America. Ideally, it does, let's say. And it wants to have promotion relegation someday in this country. But even they know someday that it can't just happen like this. A lot has to change. The culture of the game and the money in the game has to change.
Steve, final thoughts for everyone?
Sure. First of all, thank you for being here. This is an overwhelmingly good crowd, given the fact that Paul Kennedy, and I'll talk to him later, put the wrong time in its MLS draft. I really appreciate it. You know, I hope that if any of you are delegates, I've earned your vote. But I hope for all of you, because I know many of you aren't delegates, that I've earned your trust. Because what I can say is I will pledge to you that I will run this ethically and fairly, and my management style is such that it is inclusive and not autocratic and not top-down. And, you know, I think I've got a tremendous amount of knowledge about the sport in this country, but nobody has all the answers. And you guys have been tremendous in terms of sharing your ideas. And what I can pledge is so many of you will be part of that, right? And in terms of when you weigh the candidates, there are a lot of impressive candidates here. But if you do agree that this job demands someone who is a soccer expert and has deep and continuous background at many facets of the game and levels of the game, and someone who has organizational leadership experience, has led organizations, sat on boards of this type, and run businesses and other experience, in this case legal, then I hope you would agree that my profile is the only one that shares those. I really thank you for taking the time to do this, because you have so many choices here. I had an interview in the exhibition hall today, and I had never done that before since I've been here, because I have no time to do it. And I had my face pressed against the glass, because you got a lot of good options here, and I really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me. Thank you.